attention and for encouraging comments. It's always good to folks feel like maybe they got something out of your lesson. I always do. That's the thing about being a teacher. You'll get something out of it if nobody else does. But hopefully you heard something that you could take with you. I know have some that are sick now tonight. COVID's getting cranked up again. I know last Wednesday night my voice was a little fatigued from talking all day at class at school. I didn't have that issue today because we had to go virtual for the rest of the week because we've had several that are out, several teachers that are out, more so than students. So had a little opportunity to rest my voice today. But we'll get started here tonight. Last week we began our study, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Christians, and we didn't jump right into habit 1. We started out talking about the inside-out approach, if that was the approach we need to take to make a real change in our life. And just to review a little bit of that, go back a little bit. But why we studying the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Christians, it's loosely based on Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Although we're definitely not going into a business or self-help book, but we are using it kind of as an outline in some of his principles we will mention from time to time in here. And if we go through the title, 7 we said represents completeness in the Bible. So 7 different habits we'll look at. Next thing, what a habit is. It's a character or composite of our character, but all of our habits kind of makes up who we are. Powerful factors in our life, things we do all the time really without, to the point where we don't have to think about them. And we mentioned Aristotle's quote there that we are what we repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence is a habit, not an act. So that's what we repeatedly do. That's what we're going to work on. Effective, said that means being successful and having a desired effect or intended result. So we definitely want to be successful and effective as Christians. And then, of course, Christian just means follower of Christ. And to be effective, we see we're a mission we're given in Matthew 28:19. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. And this verse tells us our purpose. So inside out, we said there's 3 main points we made last week. One is we tend to focus on the outside instead of on the outside instead of the inside as people. That's human nature, I guess, because it's been going on for a long time. We started out in Isaiah there, chapter 22, 9 through 11, and talked about Isaiah kind of chastising the attitude of his countrymen for breaking down the walls of their houses to fortify the outside wall and weakening the inside to strengthen the appearance of the outside. And not looking to God who had the plan of it. And also, we looked at 1 Samuel 16:7, where Samuel was going to Jesse's house to pick out the next king after Saul, and he picked the wrong one because he went by looks. God told him that man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. So, we need to change our focus there. Well, also, number 2 was our problems are a result of interior issues, not exterior, and looked at the old saying we hear many times about taking the log out of your eye so you can get the speck out of your brother's eye. And then point number 3 was to be successful, we have to focus on the interior. Matthew 23:25 through 28, first cleanse the inside of the cup and plate, that the outside also may be clean. So interchange is the key to making an outward change. It has to start on the inside, and that will radiate out. So tonight we're actually going to start with our first habit, and that first habit that we're looking at tonight is be proactive. And word we hear thrown around a lot. Basically, for our context, this means taking the initiative. So let's start out with saying what does it mean to be proactive? Let's first start talking about us as humans. We have the ability to think about our thought process. So think about that. Okay. So think about, it's not looking in the mirror, but we're self-aware is what we call that. That we can think about how we think about things, where animals don't have that ability. Okay, they have that instinct or that innate thing that they do. They just do it because, I'm a dog or I'm a cat or whatever I am. That's how I am. That's my nature. But humans, we're different. That's what makes us human. That's why we have dominion over all things on the world. That's why we can make significant advancements, is because we can pass that knowledge on. You can train your dog to fetch or whatever, but that doesn't mean the puppies are going to know how to do it, and it's not going to teach the puppies how to do it. Okay, but we have that ability to pass on those things, to think about it. We're not our moods, we're not our feelings, we're not even our thoughts, really. We're able to see ourselves to examine the way we see things, paradigm word we used for that last week. And from that, we determine whether the things we're thinking about or doing, are they principle-based, are they reality, or are they a function of our conditioning and the conditions that we're in? We, not to take away from that, we acknowledge the power of conditioning in our lives, and but to say that we're determined by that our conditioning determines who we are, that we have no control over that influence, then that's a major source of our problem if that's our outlook. If I am what I am because of what's happened to me. We don't deny the existence of that, but we say that we're beyond that. It's called determinism. There's 3 different theories of determinism that are widely accepted today. The first one is genetic. Second one's psychic, and the third one's environment. So genetic just says my grandparents did it to me. Okay, it's my DNA. It's just who I can't help it myself. I've got a temper because I'm Irish or I'm a redhead. Excuse me, redheads. Okay, but we're hot-headed. We can't help it. That's genetic. Second one, psychic. My parents did it to me. Okay, it's just the way I was raised. Okay, so that's what I was taught. And we are a product of our environment, how we're raised. But we can't blame it on the fact I'm warped because Mommy didn't love me enough. Okay, we have the ability to make those decisions and change about who we are. And then third one, environmental, which is probably the most common, is someone or somebody else is in my environment. They're responsible for it. It's not my fault. Okay, it's my boss, it's my spouse, it's my race, it's the government, whatever. It's always somebody else's fault. I heard a little joke one time. May or may not think it's funny. It's amusing in this set, but says why don't we get married? Because we can't blame everything on the government. Okay, you got to have a spouse to blame things on. Okay. So we can blame things on different things, but that's not it. So each one of those that we just mentioned, that's based on what's called the stimulus response theory. If you ever heard of this Pavlov's dog experiment, Pavlov was trained animals to condition them. When he rang a bell, then he fed the dog, and then he got to the point where the dog, when it heard the bell ring, it started salivating. Okay, I've been in school for a long time, either as a student or as a teacher. So I'm pretty much that way. When I hear the bell ring, I know it's time to eat, okay, the lunch bell. And I'm kind of like Pavlov's dog. I start to my mouth water a little bit. When I'm out of school, a lot of times I don't even eat lunch because I don't hear that bell. I don't know it's time to eat. Busy doing something else. So, that's works some part. But the premise that is just the way we are, that's false. In reality, we have the ability to choose our response. In addition to that self-awareness, we also have a conscience. And also, we have the biggest thing is we have independent will. That's what it means to be human. God said He made us in His image. Been a lot of discussion about that. Sometimes, does that mean God's got a head, 2 eyes, a face, 2 hands? We see those used in the Bible. I'm not so sure. Maybe it's just not for us to help us understand on our terms that we can understand how God is. But I think the biggest thing is that we have a soul and we're a free moral agent. We can choose. So choosing between that stimulus and response, that's our greatest power that we have, is your ability to choose. And we're going to explore that a little bit more, talk about it a little bit more tonight. So let's define what proactive is. We use that word. Proactive means creating or controlling a situation by causing something to happen rather than responding to it after it happens. Okay, so if you're pro, that prefix means first. If you have a prototype, that's your first of that. So pro means first. So it means instead of us waiting for something to happen then respond to that, we create the situation instead of respond to the situation. It means basically we're responsible for our own lives. Our behavior is a function of our decisions, not of our conditions. We can choose our values over our feelings. We all got feelings, and we have emotions. The Bible doesn't deny that. It says anger, but sin not. It's not a sin to get mad sometimes, and just what do we do about that? So how do we respond to that? That responsibility. The word, if you break down the word responsibility, response able. I'm able to respond. I'm able to choose my response. So proactive people choose not to blame their circumstances, the conditioning, or the condition of their behavior. Choose the opposite. So sometimes it's better to understand a word by knowing what the opposite of that is. So the opposite of proactive is reactive. Something happens and I react. And another word close to that, even worse, is inactive. I don't do anything. Okay. When I was a kid growing up, I got in trouble plenty of times, and my parents, they found that verse in there. It said, spare the rod and spoil the child, and they took that to heart, so, but I earned the ones I got. But, sometimes I didn't get in trouble for what I did, sometimes what I didn't do. I was supposed to do something I didn't do. So, that those circumstances conditioning, we want to be proactive, not reactive, and we sure don't want to be inactive. Reactive people are often controlled by their environment. If the weather's good, they feel good. Okay, and I think it does affect our mood a little bit, but not to the point that ruins our day. Okay, I used to teach with a lady. She was our home ec teacher years and years ago, and she is a member of the church. She's a sweet, quiet, little demure lady, and she might have weighed 110 pounds, but she ate like she weighed 300 pounds and was a lumberjack. But every day she'd come in at lunch and she'd say, man, this weather's making me so hungry. It didn't matter if it was hot or cold, but that was her reason to be hungry. And maybe I bought into that too a little bit. So, but, proactive people, we kind of carry our weather with us, we're not like the guy walking around with the umbrella all the time. We're the sunshine, okay? Just if also that those people tend to be their mood determined by how people treat them. Okay, if somebody treats them well, they feel well. If somebody doesn't, then they become defensive. They become reactive to those things, protective of themselves. And they kind of build their emotional lives around that behavior of others and let it control their own emotions. I did it because they made me mad. Okay, we have to watch that language. Think about that a little bit. I've thought about that more lately since I've been studying this. But do we say things without thinking about it sometimes? Well, I have to. Or nothing I can do about it, or so-and-so made me feel that way. They made me mad. They made me happy, whatever. That's just who I am. If we say those things, we need to back up and think about it a little bit. I've always, especially when I was a middle school principal, I used this analogy with my kids. When I've had a kid come in and they got into a little disagreement with somebody and they had got mad and maybe they weren't the one who started it, but they finished it. They retaliated and did something, and they come in and they'd still be angry, and they say, well, he just made me so mad, okay? And there are some kids who like to flip the switch there and they like to see a show, and they know the ones who they can do it to, and that's what I would tell them. Say, look, the only reason they're doing that to you is because they know they'll get a reaction out of you. I said, you've got to be like a light switch. I said, in my office at that time, there was 2 light switches, an old switch and a new switch they'd put in. But I said, that one switch, I used to come in here and I'd flip it. And when I flipped it, the light came on. I knew to flip it every day. I said, it quit working. Guess what? I quit flipping it because I knew I wasn't going to get the reaction I wanted. I said, that's how you've got to be. So that's how we've got to be, is we've got to control our own switch. We can't let somebody else flip our switch. We got to make the choice. Eleanor Roosevelt had a great quote. She said, no one can hurt you without your consent. Okay, so if we're proactive, if we think about that, then we can't do that. And last quote, and this comes from the book. He says, until a person can say deeply and honestly, I am what I am today because of the choices I made yesterday, then that person cannot say I choose otherwise. So you have to take responsibility for your own actions. You're proactive. Excellent. Yes. It says, I am what no one can hurt you without your consent. That one? The next one, okay. Says, I am what I am today because of the choices I made yesterday. Until I'm willing to accept that, I can't choose otherwise, okay. So until I accept responsibility for it, I can't make a change for it. When we blame other people, we give away our power to change. When we say they're the ones who makes us that way, then that says we can't do anything to change it. So we have to be willing and able, and in our own mind, to say, I can do something about it, okay. But we'll come back to that, but let's get off on another one right here a little bit first. Let's talk about the inactive, about being lazy. I think we all have a little lazy in us sometimes. We need a little rest sometimes. But read Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 10. You'll look at that one. Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 10. It says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. For there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you're going. I have that on the back of my syllabus for my class. That's the last point on there, is that whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. So whatever you do your best, whatever that is. And with kids, sometimes they want to be all their effort into one thing, but maybe not another. Well, I like math, but I don't like English, so I'm going to try in math, I'm not going to try in English. Or we see that with pro athletes all the time. Unfortunately, where they do great out on the field and everything, do that, but in their personal lives, not so much. So you've got to be 100% whatever you're doing all the time. So whatever your hand finds to do it with your mind. And also we do that not really for ourselves or not even for a fellow man, but we do it toward God. Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, do your work heartily as for the Lord and not for people or not for man. Who's watching? Somebody's always watching you. Okay, I used to preach this to my daughters all the time when they were growing up. Whatever you're doing, do the very best you can do, because you never know who's watching you, and you never know what that will lead to. When you start with a job, sometimes young people, especially I think today more than us older folks, but they don't want a job right out of school. They want a position. Okay, and you got to earn the right to do that first. So, we got to have the attitude that no job is below us, no job is beneath us. We're willing to start at the bottom, do really good at that job, handle the small things well, then you'll get a chance to do better later on. Personal example of that, I guess, but not bragging on myself, but just a little example of that in my life. But the summer before my senior year of high school, my dad helped me get a job, and I'd worked all kind of jobs up to that point. But probably since I was 11 or 12 years old, I always had some kind of a job doing something, mowing grass or hauling hay or doing something. But got a job at the sawmill, and a friend of my dad's ran the sawmill. So I was stacking lumber out, and that was a real job. And I think he really wanted me to do that. So I was ready to go to college after my senior year of high school, and it worked. Okay, I liked working at the sawmill. It was the people there were good. We enjoyed working together, but it was hard work. And I started out the first of the summer, and if you know anything about sawmilling, when the lumber's cut and it comes off as boards, 1 inch, 2 inch, 4 inch, 6 inch, whatever, it comes down like a conveyor belt they call a green chain. And there was a shed built over the green chain for the 1 inch, the 2 inch, the 4 inch. But when it got out to the 6x8s at the end, that last about 30 feet was right out in the sun. That's where I was. Okay. So I was stacking cross ties, catching them, offloading them, binding them up, and getting them shipped out all by myself. And that was some real work. And getting ready for football season, it was a piece of cake after working at the sawmill all summer. But by the end of the summer, I had promoted off the green chain out in the sun till I got to work the chipper, which basically underneath the sawmill, when the slaps come off, they hit another conveyor belt and they went to this machine. It spun, it chipped them up and blew them in a big trailer that made chipboard out of. So pretty much all I had to do there was make sure the chipper didn't get stopped up. So the last couple of weeks of the summer was a lot better than the first 2 weeks. Okay, so whatever you're doing, do good at it. You'll have a chance to move on from that. Don't be like a fella used to live in our neighborhood. His name was Rex. I won't tell his last name. Y'all won't know him anyway, but just out of respect. But Rex was famous for not being real industrious, to put it nicely. He had a job. He was worked at the trailer plant for a while, which is also a real job. But he could only seem to make it to work 4 days a week. And finally, the boss called him in. He said, Rex, what's with this coming to work 4 days a week? He said, I just can't hardly pay the bills on 3. So I'd really only come 3 if I could get by with it. But I'm coming 4. He felt like that was pretty good. Well, he didn't keep that job very long. Well, he promoted himself to his next job. So he asked Rex, what do you do? And he said, I'm a go-getter. He said, what does that mean? He said, in the morning I take my wife to work, and in the afternoon I go get her. And that was kind of the job he kept for most of his life, was being a go-getter. And I'll say Rex needed to hear this lesson, and he needed to read Proverbs 6:6-8. So, go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief officer or ruler, she prepares her bread in the summer and gathers her food in harvest. Okay, so Proverbs, book of wisdom, talks about being a hard worker and what we get out of that. So be proactive, don't be reactive, and sure don't be inactive. Also, going back to that about doing a good job and not just doing it for man, but it is good for people to see that. Heard a story one time about a guy who ran a auto body shop, and he had a good reputation, had a good business there in a small town. A fella came in one day, and he just had this old truck, nothing fancy. And he said, hey, man, I need you to do something for me. He said, what's that? He said, I need you to just paint this old truck. He said, but I don't want to spend a lot of money on it. He said, just a quick, cheap paint job. I just want to change the color of it. He said, nothing fancy. Don't put a lot of work into it. Don't worry about getting all the dents out and all that kind of stuff. And he said, sorry, I can't do that. He said, what do you mean? He said, every car that goes out of here, every piece of work comes out of my shop's got my name on it. It's my signature. And if I do a halfway job on your truck, somebody's going to see that, and that's going to reflect on the kind of job I do on every job. He said, so if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. If you want me to paint it, I'll paint it, but it's not going to be a quickie half job. We're going to do it right. So we need that idea. We need that same attitude with everything we do. All right, enough on that one. Let's just go back to our main topic. Being proactive means working on what you can control. That is a biggie, okay? Proverbs 22:13. If you will, turn there with me. If you have your Bibles, let's look at that one for a minute. Proverbs 22:13. And I don't know that I remember ever reading this verse until I started this study, but it's a good one. It's a very short verse. It says, the lazy man said, there's a lion outside. I shall be slain in the streets. He said, I can't go out there. Now, there's a lion out there. There's danger. I might get eat. Okay, so what is the point? The point there, don't make an excuse. Okay, if you want something bad enough, you'll find a way. If you don't want to do it bad enough, you'll find an excuse. All right, and I think that's very true. Reactive man, the inactive man, always finds an excuse why he can't do something. Anytime that there's a problem out there, and that's the way we think, our thinking about that is our problem. The proactive man, going back to our last lesson, realized the problem is not out there, but it's inside. His problem was not the lion in the street. It was his attitude and his finding an excuse not to go out there. He accepts responsibility for that problem, says, I'm able to respond, identifies what he can do, and gets to work on it. Another story. I'm full of stories, but you probably heard this one, but there's two rookie shoe salesmen years ago, and they had went through the training program, and they had their samples and all that, and so they sent them out in the field. Well, you're not going to get your best job right off the bat. So they sent them to this third world country to sell shoes. And after 2 or 3 days, the first young man sends back a telegram. He says, this is impossible. He said, nobody here wears shoes. He said, I can't sell shoes to these people. So the second one also sent a telegram. Attitude was the exact opposite. He said, man, opportunities here are unlimited. Nobody's got a pair of shoes. Send me more samples. So it was his attitude about that. Did he see the opportunity in that problem, or did he see the problem in the problem? Okay, so it's our thinking and how we go about that. Our main verses tonight, and the part we're going to look at, is a fellow that, to me, is the best example of this in the Bible, and his name is Joseph. So turn in the book of Genesis there in chapter 39. We'll look in chapter 39 a little bit in 40. We all know the story of Joseph. He had the coat. He was the dreamer. He was the youngest of the sons, and his brothers didn't like him because one was a little jealous that he was his father's favorite, and the other was he was always coming up with these dreams telling how he was going to be better than they were, and they didn't like that. So eventually they sold him into slavery. He ended up in Egypt, and from there he ended up in Potiphar's house. Potiphar purchased him and put him in his house. Now, Joseph could have had a terrible attitude about this, and I'm pretty sure I would have, okay? This is not my fault, okay? I didn't deserve this. I can't control the situation, so I'm going to be the worst slave possible. I'm going to make him regret the day he paid for me. I'm not going to do anything. That wasn't his approach. 39:4 says, so Joseph found favor in his, Potiphar's, sight and served him. That's the key at the very end. He found favor in his sight, and he served him. The reason he found favor because he made the best of the situation he was in, and he went to work. He said, if I'm going to be a slave, I'm going to be the best slave I can be. Okay? And what was the result of that? Well, the second part of that verse says, then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. So here Joseph was a young man in a foreign country, away from his family. Family had turned against him, sold him into slavery. He had every reason in the world to be negative and have a bad attitude, but he chose the other approach. Instead of that, he says, I'm going to make the best of this situation. I won't be a slave. I'm going to be the best slave they ever had. So that was the approach he took. Now, we know the rest of the story. Unfortunately, that didn't last very long, even though he was doing the best job he was where he was. They'll say in here a lot of times, be where your feet are. You don't worry about what happened before. Can't control what's going to happen in the future. Be in the present and do the best I can right here. That's how he was. But something else happened out of his control. Potiphar's wife lusted after him and tried to get him to commit adultery with her. He refused over and over, not just once, over and over. He turned her away until eventually one day it came down to a situation where she was in the house alone. Nobody was there but him and her. And this time was a little different. And she grabbed his garment, and he had to run out of his shirt to get out of there. And, of course, she false accused him and said he tried to molest her. And, of course, Potiphar then comes in and has him thrown into jail. So here he is the second time. He's doing everything he thought was right, but he ends up on the short end of the stick. Didn't choose to be a prisoner, okay, but now I'm in prison for something I didn't do. I know I would not have a good outlook about that. You know, we've all been accused of something sometimes that we felt like we were innocent of. Talked about getting in trouble with my dad. My dad's rule was you didn't question his authority. You didn't backtalk. If you got in trouble for something, you just said yes, sir, and you took the punishment. But one day I got in trouble for something I really hadn't done it, and I just felt brave that day. And I said it respectfully. I said, Dad, I didn't do that. He said, well, you know, you probably didn't. He said, but I bet you did something else one time in the past I didn't catch you doing. So we're going to go ahead and punish you, and we'll call it even. So I can't argue with that. So, you know, that was the approach there. So that maybe that's the approach that Joseph took. Like, well, I didn't deserve to be here, but I am. So again, he made the best of the bad situation. It was out of his control, but what can I control? I can't control that I'm in prison for something I didn't do, but I can be the best prisoner I can be now. And again, he rose, moved up the ranks until everything in the prison was under his control. Okay? So, you know, he recognized what the book calls our circle of influence versus your circle of concern. And if we make a little diagram, we got two circles. First circle is everything we're concerned about. You know, our health, our family, our financial problems, what's going on in the world, what I see on the news, Omicron, whatever. All those things that I'm concerned about, that's my circle of concern. Well, my next thing then is, inside that is a smaller circle, my circle of influence. What are the things of all that I can do something about? I'm concerned about all that, but where do I focus my time and my energy thinking about? Okay, if you watch the news, and when we were stuck at home for those several weeks or months back during the first COVID, there was a real issue out there where they told people after a while, quit watching the news every night because it was just gloom and doom every night. I like to stay informed, but truthfully now, I like to watch the last of the news because they use the national news ends with that one good feel-good story right at the end. You know, tell me what's happening, but let's don't just dwell on that. What's some good stuff that's happening? Okay, so that your circle of concern is big. Your circle of influence maybe not as big. But if you watch where you put your energy, if you increase your time worrying about things you can control, like Joseph did, you'll see that circle tends to get bigger. And it starts to fill up that outside, and that little ring of air concern gets less and less. Where those things are there, but I can't really do anything about them. So I'm not going to spend all my time crying, woe is me, about those things. I'm going to focus all my energy on what I can do, okay? Like the shoe salesman, okay? These people, nobody's bought a pair of shoes, but they all need a pair, okay? Next thing there is our problems usually fall into one of three areas anyway. We have things that we have direct control over, problems involving our own behavior. We have indirect control, problems involving other people's behavior, and then we have no control, problems that are completely out of our control and we can't do anything about. So proactive approach is we identify those things that we have control, either direct or indirect, and we try to work on those. Those direct problems, that's our first three habits we're going to work on. The first three of these 7 are things that we can control about ourselves, internal, like our first lesson was last week. What are the things I can do inside to make me better so that I can get to outside things? I'm taking the log out of my eye so I can work on the speck in somebody else's. A little story here about a guy named Viktor Frankel. You may have heard of him, you may not. But Viktor Frankel was an Austrian Jew psychiatrist. And he was practicing in the beginning of World War II. And when the Germans moved in and took over Austria, things didn't go well for him after that. He ended up in a prison camp in 1942 at Auschwitz for a while. His entire family did, and all of them but one ended up dying. And the things he saw and the things he was done to him was terrible. But he said after a while, and he survived, obviously, but then he wrote several books in later years, and it really changed his outlook because he was trained as a psychiatrist in the Freudian way of looking at things, is that I'm a product of what happened to me as a child. And he believed that. But after being here in this situation, he says one day he just was in his cell, didn't know if he was going to live to the next day, and he finally came to the conclusion is, I can't control what they do to my body, but they can't touch my mind. My attitude about everything, I'm not going to let them in here, and I'm going to make this part of me stronger. And it got to the point where he could just kind of dissociate himself, that self-awareness, where he could look outside like he was looking down this happening to somebody else. And that allowed him to survive this. And he got to the point where his attitude was so good that he began to help the other prisoners see the good in what they were going through, what they could get out of this. And it even affected some of the guards, his positive attitude and the way it was going. I've told this story before, and it may have been in this class, but there was a boy that I saw in track several years ago when I was coaching track. He wasn't my team, there's another one, but he was a tall, athletic, good-looking guy, really good athlete, but that wasn't the thing that caught your attention. The attention was his attitude. He just had this air about him that he was confident, but he wasn't arrogant, and he was just helpful to everybody. He was just the perfect example of what you want your athlete to be. And this coach was a friend of mine. I commented to him. I said, Coach, that I'm really impressed with your boy there. I said, he's a good athlete, but he just seems like a really good kid. He said, oh, Coach, you just don't know. He said, he is unreal. He said, he is just he has changed the culture of our whole school, not just our team. He said he does his best. He expects the best of everybody else. And if the kids got to the point where they won't act ugly around him, the ones who do use bad language, they won't do it in his presence because they know he'll call them on it. And he not in a haughty or I'm better than you attitude, but he will just, he lets it known that's not how you should act. And he said he is just, it's unbelievable the kind of kid he is. But that's starting from that inside out. That's being positive, controlling things you can control and letting your circle of influence get wider. He had influenced not just his team, but his whole school with his attitude. So Frankel is famous for this phrase he came up with, and it's his one famous quote says, between stimulus and response is a space. So between what happens to you and how you respond to that, there's this space. What are you going to do with that space? He said, in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response is our growth and our freedom. He said, so in that spot in there, in that space between what happens to you and how you respond, is that you have a choice to make in there. And that's when you think about what's going on. You don't just react. You don't fly off the cuff. You don't say something without thinking. That's where your freedom is. That's where your choice is. And that's what got him through. And Frankel died. He lived and died an old man in 1997, I believe, was when he passed away. So basically, we go back to the prayer that they say in Alcoholics Anonymous. Lord, give me the courage to change the things I can change, the serenity to accept the things I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference. So that's pretty tough. It's figuring out, what can I work on? What can I change? So the last part of that is when we focus on our circle of influence, remain positive, and accept responsibility, we develop what's called a victor mentality. We've all heard of the victim mentality, where I'm the victim. Everything is everybody else's fault, not mine. Woe is me, poor pitiful me. You reverse that when you think about the other way, is I become the victor, not the victim in the things that happen to me. I can overcome those things. I see them as challenges that's going to make me stronger. When I go through that, it's going to make me stronger. Okay, and that's our third point is that being proactive means your life will get better eventually. Okay, things don't always appear to be getting better, and look at Joseph. He's a great example of that. He didn't choose to be a slave. He didn't choose to be a prisoner. But he chose his response to those things at every situation. And I'm sure there was times when he was sitting in prison, he was thinking, okay, God, what now? Okay, I've trusted you. I've done everything I can do, but I'm sitting in prison for something I didn't do, rotting away. What next? Well, once again, we know the end of that story is that He eventually interpreted some dreams, and that got him to the attention of Pharaoh, got called before him. Pharaoh was so impressed with him that he promoted him. Let's look there in Genesis, the first one, 39 and 22. And this is where he was in prison. It says, "And the keeper of the prison committed it to Joseph's hand, all of the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatsoever they did there, it was his doing." What we call a trustee today. Okay, but he was a prisoner, but he was in charge of all the other prisoners because he was trustworthy. Eventually then, God did make him to prosper. Taken out of the prison, promoted to position of authority over the entire country of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. So Genesis 41:40. After he had interpreted Pharaoh's dream, if you remember the next part of that story, Pharaoh was so impressed, he said, okay, if it's going to be these 7 years of good and 7 years of bad, what should we do? You know, he starts asking his advice, and he's still just a prisoner called before him right now. And of course he says, well, we need to build storehouses. We need to store up in the good years so we'll have stuff when it gets bad. We'll have plenty of food. We won't starve, and we can even have enough. We can help other people around. So you need to find somebody that can do that for you. So Pharaoh looked at his advisors. He said, who can we find better than this? He said, Joseph, you're in charge. All right. So we read there in Genesis 41:40, it says, "You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you." That's pretty high praise. Okay. He was the only thing that he didn't do was be the Pharaoh, the king. Everything else that had to be done was according to his commands. He had Pharaoh's complete trust. So that didn't come about easily. It took him several years and going through some really hard times to get there. But he had that proactive approach in, what's my circle of influence? I've got these concerns, but what can I do? What can I do? Okay? Because remember the church sometimes, maybe we get that attitude, well, maybe, I don't feel like things are going right here. These elders, these deacons, this preacher, he needs to do something else. Well, what can you control about it? What can we do? All right? I'm not saying you boss the elders around or you tell the preacher what to preach on or whatever, but what can I do? Instead of sitting back and taking a negative approach, be proactive. What can I do? I heard the story one time of this lady, and her health had gotten worse and worse and worse to the point that she was bedridden. She couldn't even come to services anymore. But what she could do is she had a telephone, and she would get the list of all the sick people and everybody who had missed, and she stayed on the phone all the time. And she was calling people and encouraging them. So if I had a little headache or a little tummy ache or whatever, and I didn't feel like coming to church, and I get a call from a lady who's bedridden and she's making an effort to do her best, it kind of makes me feel bad. Okay, so she had a huge influence on that congregation from her house, from her sick bed, encouraging others and pushing people to do their best. So she didn't think about what I can't do. What can I do? What can I do in this situation? And hopefully that's the path that we will take from here on if we hadn't been already. So again, Joseph's a great example of a proactive person, chooses the response to whatever situation they're in, and doesn't allow life to happen to them, but they happen to life. So I'm not acted on. I'm doing the one doing the acting. Okay, I don't let life happen to me. I happen to life. Go out and make something happen. I heard this little say one time, it's talking about being involved. It says, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. Okay, so that means, in your organization, maybe you need to put yourself in a situation where you have some input. And the way you do that is through your actions. Okay, so again, I don't wait to be acted on. I do the acting on my own. I saw a fellow one time where I had a job, and he was an older man, and actually was at the sawmill. There was one guy there who was stacking lumber, and he was 70-something years old, and he was still working at the sawmill stacking lumber. But he was smart. When I first went to work, I didn't know how to do it. And he watched me struggle for a day or two, and then he came over there and he said, "Son, let me show you something. I'm going to teach you how to work smarter and not harder." So the trick was not to pick up those big old pieces of lumber, but to slide them. You didn't have to pick up the whole thing. You slide it over on the stack, and then you slide it into spot. And so he showed me how to do that. So, and also he says that when you're out here and there's not any of your size stuff coming off the chain, help some of these other guys. And then if you get in a bind, they'll help you. All right, and that was true. So if they didn't always run, everything didn't come off the chain, wasn't that big. There'd be times when it was 2 inch or 4 inch or whatever, and the guy was doing that, I'd help him. So when I got in trouble, when I had a whole bunch of mine coming off and no way I could do them by myself, they helped me. So, you learn, I learned from him how to do things. He said, so also if there's nothing else is going on, get a broom, sweep that sawdust up, find you something to do, be proactive. So I learned a lot that summer working there. I learned that hard work won't kill you. It'll make you think you're dying sometimes, but you'll survive. I know the first few days I would come home from work and I would just lay down in the floor in the den until Mother said supper was ready, and I'd drag myself in there and eat supper, and I'd take a shower and I'd go to bed, and that was it. So, but I got better where I could handle it a little bit better, and it got easier. Well, I don't know if it got easier, but I got better, and I learned how to do it a little better. So going back to Joseph. Joseph definitely faced many problems in his life, greater than we have, I'm sure, and probably greater than anything we ever have. I don't think any of us have ever been sold into slavery. May have been put in prison falsely. I don't know your history, but but not sold into slavery at least. But he chose to focus on his circle of influence, and it grew. Last week we said, into the hands of every individual is given a marvelous power for good or evil, the silent, unconscious, unseen influence of our life. That's simply the constant radiation of what man really is, not what he pretends to be. So again, what happens inside of you is going to shine. Let your light shine. The little kid song. Don't cover it up. Don't hide under a bushel. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. If it's bright enough, if you're living like you're supposed to, if you're right on the inside, it's not going. You can't help but it shine. People's going to see that, and they're going to be attracted to that. So whatever our present situation, again, rest assured you're not your habits. All of us have habits I'm sure we like to change. You're not your habits. You can replace them, and you can be more effective. Be patient with yourself. It's not going to happen overnight, just like Joseph. He could have thought, well, this is taking way too long. I've been in this prison way too long. I need to get out of here. But it was all in God's time. First of the year, I'm working at Mars Hill now, and principal there, Mr. Rutherford's a great guy, and really enjoy working with him. But he had a say in our first faculty meeting about what the year was going to be. We had a rough year the year before. He said, I'm not sure what this year's going to be. He says, we do not know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. And I like that, and that stuck with me. Okay, we don't know what's going to happen, but we know who has a hand in that, and we know it'll all work out for good, just like it did for Joseph. So we have to believe that whatever coming, that what's going through now is going to prepare us for that. Okay, those hard times working sawmill, they prepared me for football practice that year, but they also prepared me for life in general and other jobs that I had in the time. So whatever you're going through, go through it patiently. And, trust that God's tempering you or preparing you for something. Be patient with yourself. Be patient with your situation. Find out what you can work on it to be the best version of you that you can be. So next week, we'll pick up with habit number 2. We'll just kind of take those as they come. Like I told you last week, hopefully you'll get something out of each lesson, but they're designed to kind of be a series so that they kind of build on each other. So if you can be here, or if you can't, if you can listen to the recording of it later or whatever, hopefully it could be something that can be beneficial to you. But again, thank you for being here, and thank you for attention. Let's end with a word of prayer before we go. Father, we thank you for today. Thank you for all the many blessings of it. Thank you for this ability we have to our health, so we can come out tonight to study their portion of their word. Pray, Father, we'd think on these things, that we'd read your word, we'd study on them and apply them to our lives. We become better servants of thine. And by being a member of the congregation, we can make our congregation stronger. Father, be the ones who are sick, not able to be here tonight. For the ones who lost loved ones, pray that you comfort them only you can. Forgive us our sins, and finally, and guide, and direct us, find, save us in heaven, is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen.